Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk today about spring canola. I'm not going to cover the winter canola in my presentation here. First of all, I would like to put things in context of where we are with our potential, genetic potential. So on this particular slide, on the bottom, you will see that we have the years from 1990 to the current year. And on the left, you see the pounds per acre. This is data from the statistical service, and each dot represents the obtained yield from farmers in the field. So as you can see, the dots are kind of bouncing around, but there is a nice red line, which is kind of the trend line. And if you look at that formula, it will show you that over time we have increased yields of canola by 17.5 pounds per year. Now, that goes in two ways. It is the genetic potential, and secondly, the increase in management. And we're going to talk about some of those management aspects today. But as you can see, the dots kind of vary by year, and that is the environmental. So although the genetics is good, the management is good, we depend on the weather. And then the last dot on the slide you can see here is the yield that is obtained in the past year, which is definitely below the trend line. So as we evaluate last year, the 2021 season, what I did is I went to the statistical service and looked at the ratings by week. This is the week, and the ratings of the crops, good in blue and good on the 5-year average. Obviously, we were way below the average for our canola production due to drought and other weather conditions. The important things about canola to actually get the genetic potential is to give that plant the best opportunities. And one of the things to do is to get the planting time right. So it is an early season crop, and we want to kind of get the crop flowering when it is relatively cool. So I'm just giving you a few dates to set the stage here. So here we have planting dates on the left from April to June, and then I have arranged the yields in percent of the highest yielding date. So in Carrington, you can see the highest was obtained early season, and as the season progressed and you planted, you had a lower yield. The same trend applies to Hettinger, where the yield drop off as you plant later, as well as in Minot. However, Langdon, as you can see, is a bit more forgiving. The yield stays a little bit more stable over a larger planting window. One of the things, of course, when we are talking about the potential of a crop, it is how long can the crop use the sunlight. And in this particular graph, again, we have the seeding date in the first bar. Then we have the first flower. First flower is after planting. So we see here, if you plant early, it is 50 days. Then beginning to end flower is 23 days, and then it takes another 22 days to mature for a total of 95 days in the field. If you go to the last day of the 9th of June, you can see that the total days in the field is 70. Well, that is partly explaining why that yield drop is when you plant later, that there is less time that the plant is in the field and can absorb that sunlight and transform it into yield. So this is kind of a graphical representation of days in the field and relative yield, that you can see that if you plant and have more days in the field, the yields were higher. Now, in Carrington, in this case, the highest yields were obtained 90 to 95 days in this particular experiment. We have to realize, though, that the days that it takes from planting to maturity is very much driven by the amount of heat, and I will talk about that briefly. The other factor that we have to consider, that because canola is an oil crop, we need to have also the oil percent high. And in this case, we have the seeding rate on the bottom, and we have the oil, and we can see that as you plant later, the oil content goes down too. So although we have the genetics for high oil, still the planting day is important to achieve that high level of oil. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about a tool that can help us with understanding the growth and the development of the plant. So on the NDON station, which is the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network, there is a tool, and that is talking about canola growing degrees and the growth stages. So you can get more information right there. So I'm not going to go into the details, but the basic for the growing degree days for canola is that the base temperature is 41 degrees. The base temperature for other crops has a different number. So for instance, corn has 50. So it will mean that the numbers of growing degree days for canola are going to be different compared to corn. So we do need to use the ones for canola. In this graph, we have the growth states on the left, and then we have an accumulated range of growing degree days. So what it means is every day the growing degree days are calculated, which is the average temperature minus the base temperature, and then it is added. So after a number of growing degree days, we will get the germination take place and we get the seedling. So the numbers here is kind of the growth states between putting it in the soil and when the seedling is there, and the rosette states. So there is kind of a range, and the range is there because there is some variety difference between how long a growth stage might last. Now on the last column here, I'm using a growth states key, and officially there is a key which indicates planting 0, seedling 1, the rosette states is indicated with the 2s, the early bud states is indicated with the 3, the flowering with the 4s, and the ripening with the 5. And so you can find some of the keys and also the growing degree days. So you have a kind of a range. Now, as we are looking at the range, you can look at this at the bottom line, ripe maybe at that 1800, 1900 range. So this tool gives you the opportunity to monitor the growth stages over year. So I'm just using here an example from last year. So I'm going to go canola growing degree days. I selected for this example Langdon, and then I'm going to compare it with the 5-year average. So as an example, I used the date of planting as the 15th of May, and then I went all the way out to the end of July. So when you click on that, you will get a sheet that looks like this. It will give the actually date that you are looking at. It gives you the location. It gives you the day that the growing degree days were reported. Now, I'm using here a historic document, what happened, but during the growing year, you can do this and you can follow on how many growing degrees you already have. And then it will give the estimated growth state for the day that you are looking at this tool. I'm looking at it from this year going back. So what I did here, I put the accumulative growing degree days from May through July, and the growing degree days indicated on the Y. So you can see here, and I'm going to compare that one with the 5-year average. So the red is the 5-year average. And as you can see, the blue bar is continuously above the 5-year average, which means that because we had a warmer season, more accumulation of heat had accumulated, and the growth of the canola is based on the heat units. So the heat was driving the crop development, and we got a faster development than on an average year. And this is Langdon data, and you would see the same in other locations. So I'm superimposing on this one when approximately the seedling was established, the 3 to 4 leaf, the bud, the flowering, and the ripening. So if you can see at the flowering time, definitely there were more heat units already, meaning that it was warmer during the flowering, and flowering is an important period when we get the yield established. So not only is, of course, the yield determined by the flowering, but also by the rainfall. So the red bar is the rainfall indicated on the right, and you can see there were a few spikes of rain, but there was also quite a period of drought before the flowering. So for Langdon, the rainfall was about 70% from normal. Now I'm setting here up for some of the data that I'm going to show of the hybrid results that I will present shortly. Now the tool also can give you a map which indicates on a specific date what the growth stages are. So in this case, I chose the date of planting the 15th of May, and then I looked at what was the growth stage at the 1st of July. And this is indicating that in the kind of the Langdon area, we had early flowering, and some of the southern areas, you can say, if you planted on the same date, would have been late flowering. So this is all dependent on the planting date, but it will give you an overview over the whole state. So this will be a good tool for consultants to kind of monitor where they are in their growth stages, but also looking at some of the local field conditions. Now, models are always a model. It is not always precise. You still have to go in the field and make sure it is exactly the same in the field. So the next part of the presentation, I want to focus a little bit on canola variety trials. So NDSU is doing a lot of variety testing, and I have kind of brought up here the data for the variety testing for canola. The easiest way to get this data is to Google NDSU canola variety trials, and you will get to this page. So we have here on this particular site variety trial results, which is appearing in a booklet form, a PDF that you can download and you can look at. So this booklet looks at the front page like this. It is also available at the various research and extension centers, and you can obtain it there for your use, but you can also just kind of download this. Now, one of the things, of course, with canola is we do have various herbicide traits, from conventional to Roundup Ready, TrueFlex, Liberty Link, Clearfield, and SU canola. Of course, we should only use the appropriate herbicide for those traits to make sure that the crop is not damaged. But within our booklet, we have various hybrids included in the trial. So in table 4 and 5 of the little booklet, this is an example of what you might find. So we might find in this booklet the type, so that gives you the brand, the hybrid, and the type. But what I want to focus on is that it does give a rating for black leg resistant, this is R, and it gives you a rating for clubroot. Later today, we'll come back to some of those ratings. The newest thing that we have is a variety selection tool that is slightly different from the variety booklet. So you can go to ftagndsu.edu, and on that specific site, you have the opportunity to click on any of the crops that NDSU has data for. So in this case, I am looking at canola, and then if you are bringing that one up, it has some information, for instance, from Minot, and it has from Langdon. And for the example, I'm just going to show you something that was appearing from Minot. So the nice thing about this particular tool is that we can manipulate the data a little bit in a different way. You as a producer or consultant can use this data as you desire. So first of all, on the top of each column, you can click and it will sort it from A to Z, or low to high, or high to low. So for instance, in yield, you can click it and it will bring up and sort everything by highest yield. If you're more interested in a company, you could sort it by company. So this will help you to kind of find information a bit easier. Also, there is a way to chart the information. So as you are clicking on the chart of the Minot data, then on the chart you can click for whatever attribute you want to kind of look at in more detail. So I talked earlier a bit about bloom and days to flower. So I kind of check those boxes, and plant height in this case. So this is canola data for Minot by the hybrid that is tested. So you can kind of compare several things. It's also including oil and yield. So depending on what you're interested in, you can manipulate the data. So going back to some of the examples of what you can find in the variety trial booklet, all the tables will have some additional information besides the yield. Here we have the hybrid, the days to flower, flower duration, days to maturity, plant height, cover, oil content, and now I see it was here 2020 saying, but it is actually 2021 information. But again, here it is important to realize that if we just go back and look at the days to maturity, you can see that the graph that I showed you earlier had more days in the field of in the 90, and that was for Carrington. Langdon has a little bit of a cooler climate, so typically Langdon has more days in the field, so you really have to compare varieties amongst themselves at a location. So as we are looking at this particular data, of course, yield will be one of the most important pieces of information to consider. So here I truly look at the 2020 canola Roundup Ready, and I'm going to contrast it with 2021. In our recommendations, we always mention that please look at more locations or more years. So we have booklets available on our website from the previous year, so you can get the information from both 2020 and 21. As an example here, I put the hybrid's name and the pounds per acre. And if you're looking at the difference, you can see that this one is a fairly highly yielding environment, but you can still see that from the lowest on the left to the highest on the right, there is a substantial difference in yield. Now, looking at canola in 21, you can see that the yield is not 3,000 pounds, but it is actually more in the range of 1,800 pounds for the highest yielding. Again, here are the hybrids on the bottom and the yield on the Y. So again, there is a big difference between the lowest yielding and the highest yielding. Now, we don't have only the Roundup Ready, but we also have Liberty Link and Clearfield. And again, I'm looking here at the 2 dates, 2020 and 2021. And you can see the yields were quite high. So the take-home message for this part of the presentation is that variety selection will give you the highest genetics. We also then have to have the right weather conditions to actually achieve those weather conditions. So last two slides that I want to show is that I always am interested also in the height, the crop height, and the pounds per acre. And this is based on 2020 data. And here you see that the height of the plants was 52, 54 inches, and it was actually a negative trend for height and yield, which seem to indicate that if you in a good year have plants that are too tall, there might be a little bit of an issue with the plant lodging or other factors. This one is from 2021, and here you can see a small plant versus the one in the 40 range, and there was a positive. So the take-home message seemed to be that if you are looking at the variety, the height is not the most critical, it is the genetic potential that is important.